Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted, because while the Earth has many humans, us humans only have one Earth, thus rendering us the expendable ones in the fight for balance. It's no secret that Shintoism is important for the story of One Piece. If you are unfamiliar with Shintoism, it's essentially a religion popular in Japan that is unlike most other religions, in that it does not have periodic services, holy texts, or even a founder. It's more accurate to say that Shintoism, especially in modern Japan, has become more part of the values reflected in society and the culture that honestly seems more appreciative of the world around them as it is than any other belief system that I've ever experienced. And one of the main parts of the Shinto belief system are the notions around animism, specifically that a soul lives within all existences, from objects to plants to mountains. It can all be defined as kami, or deities, meaning that there is life in all things, inanimate or not, and so all things need to be treated with respect, and more importantly that human life is actually the children of kami. And all of that is what we will be focusing on here when talking about One Piece. I don't really need to explain how this connects to One Piece, but if you're a little lost, then let me remind you that whether you want to admit it or not, you probably had strong emotions when it came to the Going Merry and how it came to life after being treated with such respect. And while that event was far in the past, I'm going to explain how that event might be one of the most important aspects of the last saga. So if you're new to the channel, the way I view the world is by making connections. So let me connect you to my vision, the ParVision. Alright, so the concept that all things are living is obviously reflected in the One Piece concept voice of all things, and what I like to call breath of all things. While voice of all things currently seems to be related to important things like Zunisha, poneglyphs, and swords, breath of all things was a concept that, while in Arabasta, really showed us the depth of Shintoism's connection to the One Piece world. Zoro here is hearing the breath of the rocks, trees, and even man-made objects like building rubble. He could feel the rhythm of the breathing and was able to properly interact with it. Him feeling this sensation while being close to death allowed him to learn how to cut nothing, or more accurately, cut what he wills to cut. He could sense the will of a leaf and avoid hurting that leaf, and then he could feel the sensation of iron, which was Mr. One's body, and was able to cut iron canonically for the first time like this right here in this epic scene. Now this scene, yes, is a pre-time skip concept, but we actually see it come back to relevance a few times in the time skip, and the main points actually come back to us in Dressrosa, where it seems like Zoro used this ability to sense Pika and separate him out from the stones around Pika and essentially isolate him. But that's not as strong of an example as where Sabo was able to do much of the same thing in a very different way. Sabo was able to sense the core of the stadium, and he targeted that core with what I presume to be Rio of some sort that happened to be displayed as wind. Hint hint, elemental hockey video is coming soon. But anyways, this concept of voice of all things, or life in all things, is something Oda himself has been throwing in our faces, and on this channel we have been really emphasizing this. And so to acknowledge this recent development, but also to get it out of the way, this video will be an amalgamation of many videos on this channel that will connect us to a greater realization by the end of it all. So if you haven't seen these videos, or you hit a concept that you'd want more explanations on, I will leave the links for these videos in the description box below. The videos being the double layered eye theory, Mihawk is a sword, can devil fruit boats float, mind rope, and devil fruits are training wheels for peak hockey. So anyways, where I was originally going with this is that one of the most important group of objects in all of One Piece are swords. They've gotten highlighted many times. This video might explain how black blades even come into existence, but we see that gradual sentience of swords or blades in One Piece. We start off where swords are just normal objects, but very quickly in Logtown, we get the sense that swords can choose its wielders, and can also be cursed and kill their owners. That gets more fleshed out as we follow Zoro's journey and hear more lines calling his swords problem children, for example. We also see that swordsmen have to extend their will through their swords, and while Zoro interacted with two black blades and can blacken his blades, we still have virtually zero understanding of how one creates permanent black blades on their own, which, if you've seen my short, is something that I've said and Oda also alludes to in volume 2 of Road to Laugh-Tale, where he asked us if hockey alone is enough to make a black blade. But anyways, on our journey we also get two interesting developments. We see that Mr. One has a devil fruit that turns him into basically a human sword, and then we see Funkfried, a sword that is capable of consuming a devil fruit and allows it to turn into an elephant. Now, we went many years just sitting on those concepts, but we can't forget those two instances in the light of what Vegapunk told us. He said that every devil fruit is a possibility for human evolution that someone desired. If only I could be like this, if only I could be like that. All of those powers represent the many branches of the future of humanity. So then if you have to ask yourself, wait, doesn't that mean that Mr. One's dice fruit was created by the desire for a human to evolve into a sword, and they successfully achieved it, hence the existence of the fruit? So yes, humans' willpowers, dreams, and desires have no bounds and can result in a situation where if willed hard enough, even a human can become a sword. But then we are also given Funkfried, who ate an elephant fruit. That possibility would imply that a sword could possibly become an elephant. But at the minimum, even if that sounds too crazy for you, then it means that a sword has a will, and that will somehow connects it to human evolution, which is honestly way more digestible after Wano. See, in Wano, we learn that swords can have such a strong will. They can exude the Ryo of its user. And this puts us in a situation where we witness Zoro, arguably one of the most undefeatable characters in all of One Piece. Like, even if I had God on my side, I'd be afraid of Zoro. But our Zoro was almost killed by Enma. And in that revelation, we learn that the extent of swords and their manifestation of their willpower. A sword simply being held could kill an MC of the show. And this sword is not even a supreme blade, nor is it a black blade, and technically it's not even considered a cursed blade despite it being capable of all the things one accomplishes with it. So I would imagine the capabilities of a sword will probably increase when we reach supreme and black blade levels, or even crazier, a supreme black blade. And you attach Shintoism ideals to this and you could have a god level sword that is basically alive at that point, and that's where my patented Mihawk is a sword theory comes in. And since this is after 1076, I have to acknowledge the newest piece of foreshadow to this, in that Oda literally made Mihawk a sword here. If you can't see how this could play as foreshadow to Oda continuing this trend and making Mihawk an actual sword, then I don't know what to tell you other than this is the pattern Oda uses with all of his concepts. He trickles them in, hides them in the background, has you learn about them passively, and then finally introduces you to the full concept much later. And this applies to nearly everything, and most often is referred to the case with Haki. But again, if you watch the full video, you could see how Mihawk being a sword would have been foreshadowed from Mihawk's initial introduction. But anyways, I was just wanting to talk about the progression of what seems like to be a soul within inanimate swords that are actually very animate, even if you take the theory part out of it. But it's not just swords. A gun and teapot both also had devil fruits that turned them into animals as well. The Whitebeard pirate Rakuyo has a spiked flail with a canine face, and this was emphasized when it tried to bite Kizaru. These examples have been littered throughout the series in my opinion, similarly to how Haki was shown here and there in the pre-time skip, bringing us to a point where in the future sentience and spiritual power will be explained in the future. And in the future there's still more that can be introduced. For example, Goldberg, one of Hiruden's new giant pirate members who is under Luffy's Grand Fleet, has a shield with a face on it that is extremely different than any homie design. And we've already talked about this at length in the past and on streams that it doesn't really make too much sense for this to be a homie right now. This shield might be something we've never experienced before that the giants have, as something similar to how Wano has special craftsmanship. We wouldn't really be too aware of Elbaf's creations as we've had so little exposure to them throughout the series. But all that being said, I know I haven't forgotten the most important object given sentience. Yes, ships are very important to look at in this regard because the Going Merry is an object that was given so much love that it manifested a physical spirit using its supposed soul that it acquired. This was the Going Merry's Klabauterman that was visible to Usopp and audible to Iceberg and the rest of the crew. It was able to not only repair itself to its original state during Skypiea with no assistance, but it was also able to sail itself during the Aqua Laguna from Water 7 to Enies Lobby to rescue the Straw Hat crew, again without any assistance. The only time it needed assistance was during the Aqua Laguna from Iceberg, probably because it needed more than a repair. It needed the world's best shipwright essentially to patch it up. But that being said, we have witnessed an object not just come alive, but bring us to tears. Many of us weren't crying over a ship. We were crying for a friend that was enjoying the adventure, probably only second to Luffy. That joy and happiness to be treated well, but also to the fullest, is exactly what the point of Shintoism belief is. It's to treat anything and everything everything with respect because its existence is aiding you in life. So you're supposed to use it properly and you give thanks to it and treat it as if it's alive. That is exactly what the Straw Hats did. While the Clobarderman aspect seems to be self-contained within ships, we have a very strong understanding at this point in the story that the definition of what a ship is very loose. A question I asked in my Devil Fruit Boats Float video was if an island could be considered a ship if it moved, and in a future video I might ask if an iceberg or a glacier could be a ship. I mean, I proposed a cloud for Pluton, right? To Tom, the master shipwright, this sea train was a paddle ship, and we saw a sword enact its will on Zoro. And I mean, we still don't know what this Grim Reaper was, but a lot of people asked if this was Pluton because apparently Pluton is just resting beneath Wano, or others were saying that this was Enma's spear, or Enma's Clobarderman, given that Enma means King of Hell and its Clobarderman being the Grim Reaper wouldn't be too crazy. All of this makes you wonder if ships are the only ones that can manifest a Clobarderman, or just a physical spirit. And so with all the talk about inanimate objects with souls, it would be a travesty if I didn't address the obvious elephant in the room. No, not that one. I'm talking about the Soul Fruit and Big Mom, the power that literally inserts a human soul into inanimate objects. See, this power lays down a few interesting parameters of the world Oda is setting. From what we gather, Big Mom can take human souls or fragments of people's souls and insert them into objects, plants, and mountains. Doesn't that sound familiar? A direct reflection of Shintoism? But actually, it's technically a weird twist since it's inserting human souls into inanimate objects, and inanimate objects are said to already have souls within them, according to my understanding of the belief system at least. But also, Big Mom can't apparently put souls into people or corpses, and I'm assuming this is also because the Kage Kage no Mi that Moria has seems to be the perfect flip, in that Moria can only put shadows into people or corpses. But going back, there's a weird gray area that I honestly completely forgot about for the Soul Fruit. You know Randolph and Crane? Those were both animals that had souls inserted into them that personified them and made them able to speak like a human. This development is honestly super interesting because Randolph was a rabbit and next to Carrot, the rabbit mink, it looked like they were basically the same thing. The only way Carrot could figure out that Randolph was different from a mink was because he couldn't use Electro. But isn't that so interesting? I know there's a lot of people that believe that minks can use Electro because static electricity from their fur, but Carrot seems to indicate that it's specific to minks, and we know Electro is largely tied to the Sulong form that ties the minks to the moon. I wonder if there's a connection that could explain all of this that we may have discussed on our channel at length. But just before I make the connections, let's talk about the meaning of putting a soul in an object. See, you could almost discount that objects have their own souls in One Piece because of Big Mom's fruit, but you can't say that's the case because she can put souls in animals, which we know to have spiritual powers, as in my opinion, animals can have haki in One Piece, but also Rayleigh explained observation haki as sensing spiritual power and was talking about the different levels of power that each of the animals had on Ruskaina. And again, Breath of All Things and Voice of All Things exist, but what we also said is that not all objects have Voice of All Things. Right now, it's not like Luffy can just hear the trees talk to him, it's specific objects. And let's see how Mother Caramel describes the Soul Fruit power in the face of the giant fire that Big Mom started. Mother Caramel says, "Let me give you a voice." And what we also see is that when Pudding gives memory filament to the seducing forest, they are given the memories of their human soul. So tying this back to the recent chapters, it seems like the two primary things that soul or soul strength gives you is a capacity for memories and a voice as well. And what's even more interesting is we see the degree of soul power within her homies. Specifically, when Big Mom takes strong souls, usually her own, and inserts them into objects, the objects that get the soul are much more durable and resilient. When Brook, dubbed the Soul King, releases his Conqueror's Haki like blast, he knocks out all the weaker souls, but cannot do this to Big Mom's Napoleon, Prometheus, and other Big Mom soul-infused homies. So I wonder if there's something interesting that Oda does to show amped up souls within objects. And for that, let's take a good look at this panel from chapter 1031 and look for a connection between Mihawk, who could be related here, or maybe even the Sulong Minks, who also get possessed by a soul. You guys see it, right? For some reason, Oda decides to give ringed eyes to the super strong souls that inhabit objects. Also, keep in mind, it's not just any objects and any souls. These are Big Mom's souls, and also very important objects besides Napoleon. It's literally a cloud and fire. Like, if we're talking about things that get personified as gods or sentience, it's not just Japan that would do this for these things, but nearly every mythology that you could think of from the ancient times has done this. I mean, this is interesting for so many reasons. I mean, I do want want to talk about this in the context of paramecias, zoans, and logias, but for right now, let's just go back to the eye situation. See, in a previous video, I presented the idea that these eyes indicate multiple wills being present within whatever it is inside of, which makes a lot of sense in the homie situation. In Hakuba and Cavendish, they have two souls, and if you combine my Mihawk as a sword theory and the double-layered eye theory, it makes sense. With Sulong Minx, it's that they are getting the feral memories of their ancestors that are possessing them, which we have discussed how souls are primarily rooted in memories being a significant portion of that. And now, with all of this, we have gathered all of the ingredients. By now, you might have forgotten why I'm even talking about all of this, and I said this is all going to be vital for the last saga. And as a hint, try to remember the thumbnail. But before we go into it, if you haven't already liked the video and subscribed, have your Dorito-covered gamer fingers ready for it when this idea starts to make your mind race a little. So, okay, to consolidate, if everything in existence has a soul, and the strengths of these souls can reflect their abilities, some swords give an aura, some objects are able to eat devil fruits, Enma is able to suck out Zoro's haki, the Going Merry was able to repair itself and sail itself, and every other example we discussed, including how poneglyphs are said to have voices in them, which directly relates to the idea that they have souls in them and memories. But let's take a look at why these objects gain sentience. Why aren't all objects just walking around flexing their soul powers? And for that, we really have to look at the Enma and more importantly, the Going Merry. And real quick before we deep dive those, think about Papa. He was a starfish that willed itself into becoming a human. And guess what he did with his life? He pursued fashion. A starfish which has a higher state of sentience was able to do this. But what about inanimate objects? We have a fair understanding that the creation of the Enma took a lot of care. When Kozuburo speaks of it, he says it was his greatest creation, his magnus opus, not to be confused with the magnum opus, where you also end up with life's greatest creation. But jokes aside, this could also explain why, while the counterpart, the Ame no Habakiri, though stated to be of similar levels, the Enma is more particular about its wielder and how it's used, but also its capabilities currently mentioned in the story are higher as well. Kozuburo called it a masterpiece, so there was a lot of care in the creation. And on the flip side, let's take a look at the Going Merry. While the Going Merry was designed by Merry and made for Kaya, it could be understood that this ship was built really well. But what made it especially unique was the passion imbued in it. And once the Straw Hats realized the voice they were hearing was the Merry, Luffy responded with all of the neglect that they had for Merry. And the Merry said in its final words, "Even so, I was happy. Thank you for caring about me. I was truly happy." So you can see that what brought the Merry to life was that the Going Merry was important as a ship, but what made Merry transcend from a ship to an irreplaceable Nakama was when it gained a voice and shared its memories. The two very things that we just established that are core to sentience and souls. This moment that we had with the Merry may have prepared us for a future situation. Let me reread the quote that started this video. Most human beings have an almost infinite capacity for taking things for granted, because while the Earth has many humans, us humans only have one Earth, thus rendering us the expendable ones in the fight for balance. While in this discussion, we understood that all things are alive in the One Piece world, and honestly, one of the most active objects in all of the One Piece world is the planet itself. The Earth is something that we take for granted all the time, and we see that even in the One Piece world. What we see is that many of the religions or belief systems in the One Piece world give thanks to the sun or moon, but rarely thank the thing that they stand on. The truth is, we often take things for granted when it is granted to us, and we see that it was the lunar races and Skypians that did not have the Earth that actually worshipped the Earth. In the Enel backstory, we get an understanding that it seems like because they ran out of resources on the moon, they jumped ships and tried to seek a sustainable life on Earth. Did you catch what I just said? They jumped ship to seek a sustainable life on Earth. See, that's the funny thing when we're talking about our planet. The Earth is commonly called a giant wet rock floating in space, but especially in modern times, it gets romanticized as a giant spaceship for humans to traverse the currents of space. The popularized term being Spaceship Earth after a few authors had wrote about this like George Orwell, but primarily rooted in a famous speech made at the United Nations by Adlai Stevenson, the US ambassador to the UN, in 1965, which is just a few years before man made it to the moon. So let me read you an excerpt from his speech. We travel together, passengers on a little spaceship, dependent on its vulnerable reserves of air and soil, all committed for our safety to its security and peace, preserved from annihilation only by the care, the work, and I will say, the love we give our fragile craft. We cannot maintain it half fortunate, half miserable, half confident, half despairing, half slave to the ancient enemies of man, half free in liberation of resources undreamed of until this day. No craft, no crew can travel safely with such vast contradictions. On their resolution depends the survival of us all. Your brain might have had a few sparks of connection of how that speech could have directly connected back to our story. We are preserved from annihilation by the love we give our craft. Like the Straws gave the Mary and thereafter the Sunny, but the most important part of all of that is the analogy that the Earth is a space ship, a ship that everyone on Earth should love. So given all that we talked about, wouldn't it make sense that the Earth had a Cloboterman? If the Earth is the vessel for all of humanity, it would have a soul, a spirit, a voice, and even memories, given how grand of an object it is. It's celestial. Even in the Shinto belief, the planets had to be thanked. So it wouldn't be crazy to think that the Earth has a Cloboterman, and it probably already clicked. Yes, what if that Cloboterman was Im? So much of the story would make sense. And you're probably wondering what it would mean if Im was the Earth's Cloboterman. That would mean that like the Enma could enforce its will on all who wield it, it would also mean that like the Mary, it could repair itself to its original state, just like the Going Mary did. And we already know that the Earth essentially sails itself, but if you think of every single capability we realize for objects in One Piece and combine it, that would be Im. That would explain why so many people believe that Im has control over the oceans. If Im were the Earth's Cloboterman, then it could do that. Creating the red line would be simple as well. The weather storms and also the sporadic nature of it all would be created by the spirit of the Earth. It's a concept that's so simple because we already presumed that Im could represent the Earth, especially now that Luffy is the sun god. We already had an understanding that Im might have been connected to Mother Nature, the sea, and this idea connects all of the dots together. So then you get an understanding of motive, but there's so many different ways this could be explained. So let me start with the simple one. It could be that stereotypical science versus nature's concept. That's when the science of the ancient kingdom became too advanced. It started impeding on the Earth's own functions, kind of like turning the Earth into a robot. I mean, we already saw that Vegapunk said he could control the climates of an island. Imagine if you expanded on that. Remember how Enel said it's unnatural for humans to be in the sky? Look how Luffy made it to the sky. They modified the Mary to be able to fly. And then look at what the Mary did when given the chance. It reverted all of the changes. So in the same way here, if the ancient kingdom was modifying the planet, maybe it had gotten to an unnatural point and then the Earth's Cloboterman decided to revert. That could explain how the existence of the ancient kingdom was largely smothered. And it might clue us in on how the remnants of the ancient kingdom remained, because it would have been done in ways that the planet could not affect it. That's just one way to look at the situation though. Let me recontextualize it with this bit of detail. Something Frankie told us about Cloboterman that is actually tied to real lore about essentially ship spirits is this. Cloboterman. He's a legend passed down amongst sailors, a sprite who lives only on ships that have been truly cared for and treated well. I guess you could call him an incarnation of the ship. He holds a wooden mallet in one hand, wears a sailor's raincoat, and when misfortune befalls the ship, he runs around and warns everyone. Sometimes they say it saves sailors' lives. And skipping ahead a little, Frankie adds, and the fact that it cared about its crew so much that it took a human shape for the night. It means that the ship must have been very happy indeed. And here's the omen from our world that was inspired for the Mary's Cloboterman. No member of a ship blessed by his presence shall ever set eyes on him. He only ever becomes visible to the crew of a doomed ship. And we see that with the Mary. The moment its state becomes doomed, it presented itself and Usopp was the one who saw it. And that might be where we are in the story. It could have been that at the point in the story, the Earth was doomed due to the events that happened 800 years ago or prior, and there came into an existence the Earth's Cloboterman. In order to prevent the world from repeating the sins of the past, they try to restrict the knowledge of the world by hiding the past and guiding the future of humanity. We see that with the Gorosei in that regard, right? They say that the world's equilibrium cannot be maintained forever. The time has come for a great cleansing. What this would do would further delay the Earth's demise, preventing the doom and maintaining Im's existence. See, the thing is, I like that idea, but then I recall that UN speech. We cannot maintain it half fortunate, half miserable, half confident, half despairing, half slave to the ancient enemies of man, half free in a liberation of resources undreamed of until this day. No craft, no crew can travel safely with such vast contradictions. On their resolution depends the survival of us all. So what's interesting about that is half fortunate, miserable, slave, the ancient enemies of man, half free in liberation of resources all sound like exactly what is going on in the One Piece world right now. So why is the equilibrium being maintained? Why does it sound like the 800 years seem like more of the same? And after the Great Cleansing, it sounds more of the same. Why would this be the prerogative of the spirit of the earth? Wouldn't it also want for the world to be in a better state? Why restrict everyone and leave them in a state of half misery? Which is a fair description of the One Piece planet. Everyone is miserable, but there is a balance that is maintained where people don't revolt. So for that, I have a few possible explanations that I want to run through. So one idea is that we landed on the moon. It was just before we started leaving the Earth for other planets. So what if in order to keep the humans on planet Earth, Im keeps them in a state where they're unable to leave the planet or even dream of leaving their islands? That would be a dark and twisted version of the Going Merry. Maybe there was an Usopp character that refused to abandon the Earth, or maybe the Earth not wanting the adventure to ever end kept everyone essentially crippled and oppressed, keeping them on the Earth. Again, all the endeavors being to make sure that the world does not become the harmonious crew that could overcome the barrier that would be space travel. This is where betrayal could be inserted into the story, or sabotage of some sort. Someone wanted to prevent Joy Boy from jumping ships. And then there's another way to look at it. If we are talking about doomed celestial bodies that actually ran dry, then that would be the moon. We actually have a story where civilization jumped ships and it was a tearful goodbye. Question being, was the moon loved? Because if it was, then while doomed, the moon could have had a Kabaterman. The problem though with this being that the unsustainable nature of the civilization that originally inhabited the moon would naturally jump ship and do very much the same thing to the next place, make it uninhabitable. So it could be that Im is the moon's Kabaterman that transferred over like the Merry did with the Sunny. And in order to prevent the citizens from running into the same problem that the previous world underwent, that's why the spirit suppressed the world. One way or another, I see a strong possibility that the Earth at the minimum has a Kabaterman. And one of the big reasons for this is the eyes. The line of logic that we use for the eyes in this video would connect nearly every example, even random ones like Zunisha, all of them being incarnations of a spirit of something else, or a spirit inhabiting another vessel, so to say. But for Im specifically, having the appearance that we have seen where it is silhouetted could even be similar to the Going Merry's Kabaterman. And on top of all of this, we might know what the Earth's Kabaterman looks like. When you think about it, the Earth was praised by the Skypians, and they had a statue that represented Verth, who apparently gave them land. That land was the island of Jaya's skull, so that means they were praying and Verth gave them land. But in order to manipulate that, if that's what they saw was the Kabaterman, then this is the face we should keep in mind when thinking about Im. And while I wrote this, I just realized another possibility. It could be that Im only appears when needed. The empty throne being empty could be true. When the world is in a dire state though, is when Im would appear. Like how the Going Merry only appeared to Usopp and the close crew members, which in this case would be the Gorosei. But at the end stages, Iceberg and the Galilao was also able to experience the Kabaterman. What if when Sabo confirmed the existence of someone sitting on the empty throne, that was confirmation that the world was in a doomed state? Which would mean that there could have been a point in time when the throne was empty, but Imu then returned, which is why the Gorosei's actions were required thereafter. I feel that one way or another, this concept of Spaceship Earth may connect back to the last saga in more ways than one. Towards the end, I was simply demonstrating all the ways this concept could be spun, but the overarching truth that Oda seems to be imparting with us is that there is a soul in everything. We aren't and we could never destroy this planet. All we are doing is pushing the planet to destroy us. Even with all our might as humanity, we could not destroy this planet even intentionally. And honestly, maybe it should stay that way. But we tend to underestimate Mother Nature in that our fragile existences could never destroy it, and even if we could not survive the cold space outside of our warm ship. Which reminds me of this speech made in 1971. The UN Secretary spoke of Spaceship Earth on Earth Day at the ceremony of the Japanese Peace Bell and said, "May there only be peaceful and cheerful earthful days to come for our beautiful spaceship Earth, as it continues to spin and circle in frigid space with its warm and fragile cargo of animate life." And so I have one last detail to give you, but before then, I want to thank you. If you made it to this far, let me know in the comment section if you like these long videos. I have so many thoughts still left to share on so many topics. Let me know what you thought of this idea. If you enjoyed your time, make sure to leave a like, share this video with your One Piece friends, and subscribe to the channel for more conversations like this. But anyways, there was a version of this video that was much more constrained. It was actually focused on all of the same concepts, but substitutes the Earth for the Oxloid. If you don't remember, there was the Oxloid bell that was from Oxloid's ship, that we're not sure if it exists, but considering how it was mentioned and the significance of the 16 bells, it makes you wonder if it somehow connects to Im. Is the Oxloid the national treasure that Doflamingo was talking about? Sometimes I wonder if the Oxloid was somehow Pluton. Like Shirahoshi has the epithet Poseidon, maybe the Oxloid was the ship and its epithet was Pluton. But obviously that wouldn't make sense because then the Oxloid would be under Wano, right? But anyways, what made me go on this tangent was the realization that the Red Line Red Port has a giant boat that's like connected to the Red Line. Like it's almost as if the Red Line grew out of this ship that has the world government logo. We have no idea what this ship is or what it did, but this existence is kind of curious. Like it could be that Im is just the Caboterman of this ship. Imagine if the Red Line was the Great Cleansing and this ship just moved and the Red Line moved across the planet and just mass wiped everyone on the planet. I might consider making a separate video discussing the possible connections that this ship or the Oxloid might have, as the Oxloid and its bell are based off of real world examples as well. So with all of that, you already know how this goes. Treat the world with kindness and respect because everything in the world exists for a reason, and you exist for a reason, so be kind to yourself. If you ever need help seeing, make sure you stop by and listen to the man with the vision. And so, like always, thank you for connecting with me, and I'm looking forward to connecting with you all on the next ParVision.